Here at Living Entertainment, we're often getting asked about speaker pairings, and recently with the launch of the new Bluesound Powernode, obviously it's a pretty hot topic. So we've taken it upon ourselves today to have a listen to 4 particularly popular speakers to tell you our findings. Now in front of me here we have the new Bluesound Powernode, not to be confused with the Bluesound NODE, which is their most recent streamer. And you can actually find another video on that particular product right here, which we've done in great detail. Now, the cool thing about that streamer is it has a bunch of cool features, and all of those have rolled over into the Powernode. And what makes it unique is, of course, a streaming amplifier. And that's why we're here today to talk about speaker pairings with the Powernode. So, let's get into it. We have the Wharfedale Evo 4.2, Wharfedale Diamond 12.2, Bowers and Wilkins 606 S2, and lastly, the Bowers and Wilkins 706 S2. So, 4 very different speakers with very different sounds and very different price points. Now, obviously, we streamed everything we listened to today, so if you would like to stream along with us, the music we were listening to covered a pretty wide berth of genres. We had The Knife's Like a Pen for some electronica. For some folk, we had Neil Young's Cowgirl in the Sand live from Carnegie Hall 1970 from what I believe is an upcoming live album. We had Thin Lizzy's Chinatown, and lastly, Lingua Ignota's Pennsylvania Furnace, which I don't exactly know how to categorize in terms of genre, but it's an emotional song that you really feel. So we tried to cover a lot of bases. And now that we've covered those bases, let's talk about the speaker pairings and what we learned during this experiment. So we'll start with the Wharfedale 12.2, since that's what I started with. And yeah, we've paired up the Wharfedale Diamonds for quite some time now with the Powernode range. We even did a pack with the previous Powernode in the Wharfedale Diamond, so we know they sound good together going into it. But with the new Powernode having an extra 20 watts of power, it was kind of interesting to see what sort of impact that would have on the little diamond pairing. And it did have an impact. So that impact is, unsurprisingly, it gave it a little bit more bass. Maybe a little bit more than a little bit. It sounded a lot bigger than it actually is. You especially notice that with tracks like a Pen, well, obviously with that dance beat, it comes through pretty damn thumping. And with Lingua Ignota, it's kind of all recorded in what sounds like an old cathedral, and you really do get that big, grand, huge sound that you'd expect for something recorded in that sort of environment. Now, where the Diamond is different to the other speakers in particular, I'd say is the treble detail that you find in the other speakers we tested today isn't quite there. Not in a way where you feel like you're necessarily missing out, but there isn't that much space between the instruments, and this can be a good thing. If you're a fan of rock recorded in the 70s and 80s, for example, and this is why Thin Lizzy was here on the list, it probably had the fullest sound for that track out of any of them. So while the definition that the other speakers had wasn't necessarily there, it felt the most rock and roll and enjoyable for that particular track, which is kind of interesting and something to think about, especially if you listen to a lot of like old rock recordings and that sort of stuff. It just kind of belts it out and sounds really sick while it's doing it. If you're not the sort of person who's looking to really think too long and hard about what you're listening to and just kind of want to enjoy it, well, the Diamond 12.2 is perfectly designed for that, I suppose, in this context. It just sounds like really fun, I suppose, which isn't usually the word we'd use for the Diamond series. I can't think of another video where we said these were the fun ones, but for me tonight, that was my experience. So the second speaker we tested was the Bowers and Wilkins 606 S2, and this was a completely different listening experience. Now, listening to The Knife, for example, as I mentioned with the Diamonds, there was a little bit of a lack of clarity there in the treble. In that particular track, I choose it because there is a dripping sound that pans left and right throughout the entire track. It doesn't stop. And on a lot of budget speakers, once the track really gets going, you only hear it on the left and right. It kind of disappears from the middle. The Bowers, that wasn't an issue. It stayed there. It was rock solid the whole time, no matter how busy the track got. So in that regard, I love the presentation of these. The imaging was really, really spot on and precise. Moving along to Neil Young, the thing that stuck out to me most there was that there was a sense of decay to everything, regardless of if it was his voice or even the frets, on the guitar, really hearing that slow decay after each one was struck. It's just really, really nice. And also the reverb of the auditorium suddenly came forward a lot more. So you got a lot more of that actual live recording feeling, which is really cool. And some of that carries across over into Thin Lizzy as well. Now, I would say these speakers put the Thin in Thin Lizzy. They're not as full sounding as the Diamonds, but they have a much clearer sense of the actual instrumentation. For example, there is a really funky bass line going throughout most of that track. And with the Diamonds, I didn't even notice it. Whereas here, it was kind of front and center, and I just kind of like had to sit back and go, oh man, I forgot how cool that bass line is. I haven't really thought about it in a while. So it's a bit of a trade-off there, I suppose. It's obviously not going to affect everything, but if you're listening to stuff from the 70s and 80s that perhaps has a thinner recording, you're not going to be able to belt it out rock and roll style, but that's fine. That's not what these are designed for, in my opinion, anyway. So based on my experience with the Bowers and the Powernode tonight, I think anyone who's really into like classical or jazz, electronica that plays with space, anything like that, this is a really nice pairing and you're going to have a really good time. Next up was the Bowers and Wilkins 706 S2, and for me these were the most surprising experience of the night. That's probably because I've had the least time with these and I didn't really know what to expect, but if I was to sum up my experience with them tonight in a couple of words, it would be deep and textured. All right, so what do I mean by that? Well, let's take the knives like a pen, for example. There is a large bass note in this track, and hearing it on the previous two speakers, you just got the hit, that was it. But with the 706s, you suddenly get this kind of rolling feeling to it. It's not just an impact sound, it becomes it is a texture. It has like a surface to it, if you know what I mean. And in terms of depth, and this is where things got really interesting as well, instead of just being a relatively, flat soundstage in front of me, there was actually a sense of three-dimensionality to the sound, which was pretty cool. So for example, that dripping sound I've mentioned before that pans left and right, it's actually zigzagging through the mix. That's really cool and really engaging. Likewise with Neil Young in that live recording, all of a sudden that auditorium feeling actually kind of stretches around behind you a little bit, which again, I wasn't expecting, and really does kind of put you in that space. It gives you that sense of three-dimensionality I'm talking about. And even then, talking about something like Thin Lizzy, which I said before had that thinner sound, with the 706s, it kind of fills back out again. But not only that, the guitars and the drums during the solo actually kind of trade places a few times. So the guitar solo is up in front, but then it kind of retreats back and lets the drums take its place. And they kind of swap back and forth a little bit. Whereas with the previous two speakers, it's just kind of like between the two of them, they're just kind of both pushed up to the front. Yeah, it's just a really interesting and engaging listen. And if you're a critical listener, it's kind of a no-brainer to me after this experience with the Powernode. It's just, like I said, I didn't know what to expect going in, but I wasn't expecting this. And I'm really glad I got it. And Lingua Ignota's track really just kind of showed not just that depth, but again, that space between the instruments was incredibly wide, and you could pinpoint exactly where everything was sitting. And again, that decay that was present in the 606 S2s was only pulled out more with the 706s. But full disclosure, this speaker does cost almost 3 times what the Wharfedale Diamond 12.2 does, and almost double what the Bowers and Wilkins 606 S2 does. So you would expect, naturally, there to be a jump in performance. But what makes it surprising is that the Powernode is comparatively a cheaper amplifier, and you wouldn't necessarily expect something like it to necessarily synergize with a speaker like the 706s. But here we are. It's just one of those funny little anomalies that sometimes you stumble upon. And when you find these little gems, you kind of have to tell people about them. It's exciting. Last of all, we had the Wharfedale Evo 4.2s. Out of the 4, these are the speakers I've had the most experience and time with. I really, really love these speakers, and I listen to them quite a bit here for pleasure listening. But paired up with the Powernode, that's what's important. So what you're getting here is kind of like a best of both worlds in some regards. You're not going to get the same level of transparency and detail that you get from the Bowers and Wilkins, but you do get the general imaging, the wide sound stage. There is still a bit of depth there. It's definitely more so than the 606s, although not quite as much as the 706s. The decay is also still there. Once again, going back to Neil Young, you can really still hear the decay on each of those frets as they're springing away there. It's really satisfying in that regard. But I think, much like we've said in the past with the Evo 4.2s, what kind of sells it is just how kind of laid back they are in terms of engagement. They're not going to make you lean in and really concentrate. They're just good at making you sit back and just appreciate what you're listening to. So with the auditorium, I'd say, for example, in Neil Young, again, the reverb isn't quite there as much, but it feels a lot more intimate and close, which, I don't know, somehow the idea of having Neil Young singing in my ears, kind of pretty chill, although he's getting pretty old now, so maybe it's creepy. I'm not entirely sure, but anyway, it was a nice feeling while it was happening, you know? That's what's important. And again, like I've used these for electronica quite a lot. I love the sound of the knife through these. I find the knife's recordings and masterings can sometimes be pretty damn harsh, and the AMT on these does a great job of toning that down while still retaining all that treble information they shove into their songs, spatially in particular. And with the Powernode, yeah, it's just more of that, basically. The Evos are doing what they do best, and that is just presenting music to you in a way that's enjoyable and you don't really have to think about. And I think that's commendable in its own way, you know? I generally enjoy that, and that's kind of what I'm often looking for. In terms of bass, I'd say it's a little bit more impactful than either of the Bowers. It's not as big or as low, but you definitely kind of get that initial tack more, which I kind of enjoy, and I think that's why they lend themselves well to electronica. And it's also textured, like once again, going back to that knife track I mentioned with the 706s, you could kind of feel a texture to the bass. It wasn't just like a subsonic frequency. And again, the Evos pulled that off. So like, I don't feel like you'd really be getting shortchanged in that space at all. It retains a lot of that, and I think that's pretty awesome. So final thoughts, Wharfedale 12.2. If you're on a budget and you want to kill a sound, this is kind of like the pairing. It's just a really fun, bold, full sound, and it's very kind to not so great recordings for you Led Zeppelin fans out there. Don't at me, it's true. So yeah, if you're just looking for like a little bit of soul, a little bit of energy, this is a really great combination. Now the Bowers and Wilkins 606S2, if you're one of those guys with Miles Davis's kind of blue on the wall, enjoy Nora Jones, just smooth jazz, classical, anything that's kind of got a bit of class to it. This is a great budget option basically for getting the most out of those recordings without breaking the bank. You know, you're going to get all those little details that they squeeze into those fantastic masterings without having to pay a fortune, and that's pretty damn slick in my opinion. The Bowers and Wilkins 706S2s on the other hand, these are kind of for people like me, I guess. People who do legitimately listen to a bit of everything. Things that are well recorded, things that are poorly recorded, all kinds of genres. These really bring out everything that those recordings have to offer, and it does a fantastic job of it. I was genuinely impressed and surprised, not knowing what I was in for when I paired these up, and especially with that sense of three-dimensionality that wasn't quite there as present with anything else. This was an immersive experience, and it's an immersive pairing with the Powernode. So yeah, if you've got the budget or you can stretch it, this is a no-brainer for me. And lastly, of course, the Wharfedale Evo 4.2. Look, I could say a lot of the same things about it as I said about this in terms of quality of recordings and the numbers of genres of music and recording qualities you could feed through it. But the big difference is instead of being super engaging, you're getting something that's just a little bit more relaxed and a little bit more easygoing and a little bit more sweet, I suppose, as well. So really, I could go either way personally between these. I think it'd depend on my mood on that particular day. In the end, there's no winners or losers here. There are no right or wrong answers. Each one of these pairings could be perfect for that certain someone, and that certain someone could be you. So if you think it might be, then please reach out to us at www.lenc.com.au and hit the messages button, and we will help you out regardless of which one of these pairings you're looking at. We're here to help. Now, if you do buy from us, that does help us produce more videos like this. So if you like our content, please consider supporting us so we can continue to make more videos like this in the future. Thank you as always for watching, guys. Bye for now. Full disclosure, these speakers do cost almost 3 times more than the Wharfedale You jerk! You ruined my day!